In December of 1880, a full-rigged ship named the Ellen Austin left Liverpool, England, carrying a manifest of emigrants bound for New York. She was a large vessel, 210 feet long and over 1,800 tons, built of white oak in Damariscotta, Maine, in 1854. She had been crossing the Atlantic for over 25 years by then, running the route between Europe and America so many times that her crew knew the swells and the currents and the moods of the mid-Atlantic, the way a farmer knows the shape of his own fields. Her captain on this voyage was A.J. Griffin. Her cargo was human, families looking to start new lives in America, packed below deck with their trunks and their hope and their willingness to endure weeks of miserable ocean crossing for the chance of something better on the other side. The voyage should have taken 4 to 5 weeks. It took over 2 months. The Ellen Austin did not dock in New York until February 11th, 1881. The delay was the first clue that something unusual had happened during the crossing. And what happened, according to the story that would eventually make the Ellen Austin one of the most famous ships in maritime folklore, was this. Several weeks into the voyage, somewhere in the mid-Atlantic, the crew of the Ellen Austin spotted another vessel. She was a schooner, considerably smaller than the Ellen Austin, drifting without direction, her sails slack, her deck empty. Captain Griffin studied her through his spyglass for 2 days, watching for movement, looking for any sign of crew, any indication that the ship was occupied. He saw nothing. No one appeared on deck. No flag was raised. No lantern was lit. The ship drifted like something the ocean had forgotten about. Griffin was cautious. An abandoned ship in the open Atlantic could be a trap. Pirates had been known to leave vessels looking empty to lure rescuers aboard, then attack from hidden positions below deck. A schooner drifting in calm water with her cargo intact looked like a gift, and gifts in the middle of the ocean were rarely what they seemed. But after 2 days of observation with no response, no movement on deck, no signal, no sign that any living person was aboard, Griffin decided the ship was genuinely abandoned and genuinely valuable. Under maritime salvage law, a derelict vessel recovered at sea could be claimed as a prize. The ship and her cargo would belong to whoever brought her into port. For a captain whose income depended on the thin margins of transatlantic shipping, a loaded schooner adrift in the open ocean was the equivalent of finding money on the ground. You did not walk past it. Griffin sent a party of armed men across in a longboat. They climbed the schooner's side and searched her from bow to stern. What they found was a ship that looked as though her crew had stepped off the edge of the world. Everything was in order. The rigging was intact. The hull was sound. Provisions were still aboard, food and water enough for weeks. There was no crew. There were no bodies. There was no sign of violence, no blood, no bullet holes, no damage consistent with piracy or struggle. The ship's logbook was missing, which meant there was no record of where she had been or what had happened to the men who had sailed her. The nameplates had been removed from her bow, making it impossible to identify the vessel or determine her port of origin. But her cargo hold was full. She was carrying a load of mahogany, an expensive tropical hardwood, probably loaded in Honduras or another Central American port, and bound for Britain or the Mediterranean. The cargo was intact and untouched. The ship herself was seaworthy. Whatever had caused her crew to abandon her, it had not been damage to the vessel, and it had not been theft. The schooner was a mystery, but she was also a fortune. Griffin claimed the schooner as salvage. He placed a prize crew aboard her, a team of his best men, with orders to sail her alongside the Ellen Austin to New York, where the ship and her cargo could be sold for a substantial profit. The two vessels set out together, the the Ellen Austin and her nameless companion, heading west across the Atlantic. For 2 days, everything was normal. The ships sailed within sight of each other, close enough to communicate by signal. Then a storm struck. The North Atlantic in winter can produce weather that separates ships by hundreds of miles in a matter of hours. The wind rose, the sea built, the sky turned black, and the Ellen Austin lost sight of the schooner. When the storm cleared several days later, the derelict was gone. Captain Griffin searched for her. He altered course, scanned the horizon, sent lookouts to the mastheads. After what may have been days of searching, the schooner was spotted again, far off, drifting as aimlessly as when they had first found her. The Ellen Austin closed the distance. Griffin raised his spyglass and looked at the deck of the ship he had claimed as his prize. It was empty. The prize crew he had placed aboard was gone. Every man he had sent to sail the schooner had vanished. The ship was a derelict again, floating without direction, without crew, without explanation. It was as if the men had never been there at all. This is the point where the story diverges, depending on which version you read. In one telling, Griffin's crew refused to go near the schooner again. They were sailors, and sailors believed in omens. A ship that swallowed men and returned them to the sea was not a prize. It was a warning. Griffin abandoned the derelict and sailed for New York, arriving late and shaken but alive. In another version, and this is the version that became the most famous, Griffin convinced a second crew to board the schooner. It was not easy. The men had watched their shipmates disappear. They had seen the derelict return to its original state, as if the first prize crew had never existed. Sailors were superstitious men, and what they had witnessed went beyond superstition into something that felt like proof of the supernatural. Griffin offered extra shares of the salvage profit and insisted that the first crew had simply been washed overboard in the storm. It was a plausible explanation. Men were lost at sea in storms all the time. The schooner was still worth a fortune. The second crew boarded reluctantly, well armed, with ropes lashed between the two ships to prevent separation. They agreed to a system. Both ships would ring their bells throughout the night in call and response, so that each vessel always knew the other was close. That night, a dense fog rolled in from nowhere, the kind of North Atlantic fog that can reduce visibility to nothing in minutes, turning the entire world into a wall of gray that absorbs sound and light and direction. The Ellen Austin lost sight of the schooner's lantern almost immediately. The crew rang their bell through the fog, and for a time the schooner answered, bell for bell, the sound coming through the gray curtain like a heartbeat in the dark. Then the schooner's bell stopped. The Ellen Austin rang again, no answer. Again, silence. The crew rang their bell all night, sending the sound out into the fog and receiving nothing back. In the morning, the fog lifted, revealing an empty ocean in every direction. The schooner was gone. The second prize crew was gone. The ship that 8 men had done it again, and this time she had taken herself with them. Neither the derelict nor any member of either prize crew was ever seen again. In some versions, the crew refused the second boarding entirely. In others, Captain Griffin himself went aboard the second time. In one account, the derelict was eventually spotted a third time, but Griffin refused to approach and fled for New York. The details shift and contradict each other because the story of the Ellen Austin is not a documented historical event. It is a legend, and like all legends, it grew. The first known appearance of the Ellen Austin story in print came in June of 1906, 25 years after the alleged events, in a short paragraph in the Daily Deadwood Pioneer Times, a newspaper in South Dakota. The item gave only the bare outline: the Ellen Austin, a derelict, 2 vanished prize crews. no captain's name, no date beyond the year, which was given incorrectly as 1891. No details about the fog, the storm, the bells, or the mahogany, just the skeleton of a story waiting for someone to put flesh on it. In 1935, Lieutenant Commander Rupert Gould, a retired British naval officer known for investigating maritime mysteries, told a version of the Ellen Austen story on BBC Radio. Gould was a compelling storyteller and a meticulous researcher on many subjects, but on the Ellen Austen, he appears to have been working with almost nothing. He claimed to have spoken with seamen who had heard the tale firsthand from surviving crew of the Ellen Austen. His version included many of the details that would later become standard in the retelling. The captain studying the derelict through his spyglass, the missing logbook, the intact cargo of mahogany, the storm that separated the ships, and the horrifying discovery that the prize crew had vanished. Gould's broadcast was popular, and his version of the story was republished in his 1946 book, The Stargazer Talks. But Gould got most of the verifiable facts wrong. He gave the wrong name for the captain. He gave the wrong destination for the ship. He gave the wrong ownership for the vessel. He placed the encounter in waters near the Sargasso Sea and the Bermuda Triangle. But shipping records and historical route data show that vessels traveling from Liverpool to New York in winter took the northern route across the Atlantic, tacking into the prevailing westerlies. This route passed far north of both the Bermuda Triangle and the Sargasso Sea. The Ellen Austen was never anywhere near the waters where the legend places her encounter with the phantom derelict. The Bermuda Triangle connection, which would later become the story's most famous element, was geographically impossible. The most likely explanation is that Gould took the bare bones from the 1906 newspaper paragraph, the only known printed source before his broadcast, and filled in the rest from imagination, hearsay, and the kind of dramatic embellishment that makes good radio. The details that could be checked against real records were incorrect, which strongly suggests that the details that could not be checked, the phantom derelict, the vanishing crews, the fog, and the bells, were invented to fill out a story that had no supporting evidence. Later, authors compounded the problem. Charles Berlitz included the Ellen Austen in his enormously popular 1974 book, The Bermuda Triangle, adding further details and embedding the story permanently in the mythology of that region. Each subsequent retelling borrowed from the previous one, adding a detail here, sharpening a description there, until the story had acquired a weight and specificity that made it feel like documented history. It was not. It was a legend, built on a single paragraph in a South Dakota newspaper. This is where the Ellen Austen story takes its most disturbing turn, and it is not the turn you expect. The researcher Larry Kusha, who spent years investigating Bermuda Triangle claims for his book, The Bermuda Triangle Mystery Solved, attempted to find the original source of the Ellen Austen story. He searched the New York Times Index. He searched the index of the Times of London. He contacted Lloyd's of London. He contacted the Public Library in St. John's, Newfoundland, which checked its files and searched the local newspaper, the Evening Telegram, for every month of 1881. He found nothing. No contemporary account, no captain's report, no newspaper article, no insurance filing, no casualty listing, no mention of missing men or a phantom derelict in any document written within decades of the supposed event. Cush concluded that the Ellen Austen encounter would remain a mystery, at least until someone located the information that Gould used for his account, and that it might remain a mystery even after that source was discovered, because the source itself might be unreliable. The ship was real. The Ellen Austen existed. She was built in Damariscotta, Maine, in 1854. She sailed the Atlantic for decades. She made the voyage from Liverpool to New York in the winter of 1880 to 81 under Captain A.J. Griffin. She arrived late, on February 11th. All of this is confirmed by Lloyd's of London, the maritime insurance registry that has documented ships and voyages since the 17th century. And according to Lloyd's of London, the number of casualties suffered by the Ellen Austin on that voyage was 0. Every person who boarded the Ellen Austin in Liverpool disembarked safely in New York. There was no missing first prize crew. There was no missing second prize crew. Lloyd's records show no loss of life associated with the vessel during this period. No casualty report was filed. No insurance claim was made. No families were notified. If men had vanished from a prize crew placed aboard a derelict in the mid-Atlantic, the loss would have been recorded somewhere. It was not. The Ellen Austin probably did encounter a derelict during her crossing. The idea that she met an abandoned ship is entirely plausible. In the 1880s, the North Atlantic was littered with abandoned ships. Between 1887 and 1893 alone, the United States Hydrographic Office documented over 1,600 derelict vessels drifting in the North Atlantic. 1,600 ships in 7 years, floating without crews, many of them still able to sail, drifting with the currents for months or years at a time. Some had been grounded on sandbars off the American coast and later refloated by the tide. Some had been abandoned during storms and never recovered. Some had simply been left behind by crews who had given up. These were real, ordinary maritime losses, nothing mystical about them. Encountering an unmanned ship in the open ocean was not rare. It was routine. Captains reported them the way drivers report potholes. In 1873, the bark Abd el-Kader, crossing the Atlantic toward Boston, found 2 separate derelicts in a single voyage. One was the Robert C. Winthrop, with water in her bilge but otherwise seaworthy. The other was the schooner Kate Brigham, fully laden with a cargo of petroleum and perfectly intact. The story ran in the New York Times and was well known among Atlantic sailors. The ocean was full of dead ships going nowhere, and finding one was not a supernatural event. It was Tuesday. It is entirely plausible that Griffin found a derelict, boarded her, and attempted to claim her as salvage. It is plausible that a storm separated the ships and that the derelict was lost. A prize crew aboard a small schooner in a North Atlantic winter storm, undermanned and unfamiliar with the vessel they were sailing, trying to navigate a ship whose logbook and nameplates were missing and whose history was a blank, could easily have been overwhelmed by the weather and lost with all hands. The sea did not need supernatural assistance to kill men on a ship they barely knew how to sail. It has been doing that for as long as men have gone to sea. But the second prize crew, the fog, the bells ringing through the night and then falling silent, the ship that swallowed men twice and then vanished forever. That is the part of the story that has no evidence behind it. That is the part that grew in the telling, from a 1-paragraph newspaper item in South Dakota to a radio broadcast to a Bermuda Triangle legend repeated in hundreds of books, websites, and documentaries. Each version added details that the previous one did not have, each retelling making the story a little more terrifying and a little less true. After the 1881 voyage, the Ellen Austin was sold to a German company and renamed the Meta. 2 years later, in 1883, she was wrecked along the American coast. The ship that had supposedly survived an encounter with a phantom derelict and the disappearance of 2 prize crews met her end the way most ships do, on rocks in a storm, with nothing mysterious about it. She broke apart and was forgotten, just another wreck on a coastline that had already claimed thousands. But the story survived. It always does. The sea creates legends the way it creates storms, out of nothing visible, gathering force from the emptiness around it, until it becomes something that cannot be ignored. The Ellen Austin legend was built from a real ship, a real voyage, a real ocean full of real derelicts, and an absence of facts large enough to fill with whatever the imagination required. The fog that supposedly swallowed the phantom derelict and her doomed prize crew was not a weather event. It was the fog of history, the gap between what happened and what we wish had happened, the space where the truth used to be before the story replaced it. And that is perhaps the most unsettling thing about the Ellen Austen. It is not a ghost ship story. It is a story about how ghost ship stories are made. If you want to hear the stories of what else the sea has taken and never returned, subscribe. There is always another ship that never came home.